Write this down. 9 plus 6 equals Common Core. If you haven't run that on YouTube yet, it'll tell you a lot about what's happening with Common Core. 9 plus 6 equals Common Core. It is not the way to teach our children math. So, in 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a very quick summary of where we are today politically. That's sort of my job up here to tell you how did we get here? Because most of us, as parents, would kind of assume that there would be a process by which the state of Ohio would have been careful about implementing something as far-reaching, something as important as the standardized system of education for the state of Ohio. But actually, not so much. In the legislature, when a bill is introduced, it goes to a committee that might spend weeks, months, even years investigating, hearing testimony, picking up information to determine, is this something we should do in Ohio? That never happened with Common Core. Common Core never went through the legislature. Common Core was adopted by the Ohio State Board of Education in 2009. And you might find that significant since the standards were not finalized until 2010. How could they adopt the standards before they're finalized? Easy. Because the federal government was offering millions and millions of dollars to states if they would adopt a standardized form of education, and really the only game in town was going to be Common Core. In fact, if you adopted Common Core, you were automatically qualified to receive the funds. So there was no debate in the legislature. And when I got to the legislature in 2012, one of the first things I started to understand was all across the state, parents were very upset about what they saw coming in Common Core. And I was going to meetings like this 2 years ago, all over Northeast Ohio, in fact, all over the state of Ohio, their meetings were being held. And we went to those meetings, and I learned about Common Core, and it was in 2012 that there was so much pressure from the districts and then from the teachers' unions that, as Rob mentioned, the state legislature actually adopted programs or laws by which you could protect the teachers and protect the districts from the adverse consequences that are going to come by following the PARCC testing this year. And in fact, we did that. But we didn't do it for your children. Now, there were those of us in the legislature which were pushing to repeal Common Core, even then, to protect the children. But that wasn't going anywhere because the money was already in the pipeline. It was already being passed out from the federal government through the states to the districts. The textbooks were being printed and sold, and your children were going to be the target of what we now call PARCC testing, which is this standardized, nationalized testing system that incorporates the Common Core standards. So finally, just a few weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, we did pass, I say we, I'm no longer in the legislature as of the end of this year, so I'm no longer a politician. Okay. This past year, a very significant thing happened in Columbus, because last year was election year, as you know. And there was a race down in Cincinnati between Representative Tom Brinkman, who's now in the legislature, and someone mentioned him earlier. He was running against an incumbent Republican. And his #1 issue was Common Core. And he won that election. And when he won that election, a lot of people in Columbus kind of got nervous. They said, well, gee, these parents must be serious about not liking Common Core. And they actually began to push their own version of a Common Core repeal bill. Now, that never got through the legislature. It was introduced late in the year. But just 2 weeks ago, they did pass House Bill 7, as someone mentioned, which finally will put into a statute your right to have your children opt out. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand. They are absolutely correct. You don't need a statute for that right. You have that right as a parent to educate your children the way you choose. But now it can actually be in statute. And so among the things I've given you here is this summary sheet of House Bill 7. And there's an article on the back that tells you a little bit about it. But at the bottom is Governor John Kasich's phone number and Senator Eklund's phone number. He's your senator in this district. You need to call these folks. Because the governor's been very vocal that he thinks if you're opposed to Common Core, you're kind of hysterical. These ladies don't strike me as hysterical. They strike me as concerned. So you've got to let him know that you're going to be hysterical when it comes to voting if he doesn't get on the right side of the Common Core issue. So there will be more bills coming, we anticipate, in the state of Ohio this year to dial back Common Core, hopefully to repeal Common Core. House Bill 7 is just the beginning. But I want you to understand, and the teachers probably already know this, the House Bill 64, which is the 2-year budget for the state of Ohio, which has just been introduced a few weeks ago, again is going to change the way teachers are assessed. Teachers and school districts are as much victims of children, but we, the parents, have to be the voice for those children. Those teachers and school districts are in a frenzy trying to deal with the constantly changing circumstances coming out of Columbus. Does anyone really think that someone sitting in Columbus or someone sitting in Washington can decide how a student on a ranch in Texas, or how a student who lives on the beach in California, or how a student who lives in Jaga County, they should all learn the same way? Does that make sense to anyone? It never makes sense to me. And we have to make sure that the state of Ohio gets that message. There are 2 things I want you to pay attention to. House Bill 64, that's the budget bill. Make sure that, because that's going to be your opportunity to really get rid of Common Core in Ohio, I believe, because there's so much education material in there. There's also a federal bill, House Resolution 5, which is the reauthorization of the No Child Left Behind Act, and you heard some of that talked about today. That bill just passed out of committee in Washington. That bill is not, the final version isn't out yet, but there's actually contrary things in that bill. There's a portion of the bill that says that the federal government cannot force anyone to adopt a standard. Sounds like they can't force you to adopt Common Core. But as I think these ladies made clear, they don't force you to do anything. But if you want the money, you have to comply. They don't steal our liberty. They buy it from us. And they buy it from us with our own tax dollars. And that is something we have to recognize. So I encourage you to contact your congressman about House Resolution 5 to make sure it truly does prevent Common Core from being implemented through the federal government, so that it does not require conformity if you take the money. And finally, just let me say, because I know we want to get some questions here too, that Common Core, in the end, as was so eloquently said by Rob, is really the future of your children. And you have to be as concerned about that as we are about all the other issues. I have 6 grandchildren in the school system here in Kansas. I'm concerned about how that's going to affect my grandchildren. I know you're concerned about how it's going to affect your children. This is your opportunity to pay attention. I can tell you, and I don't think Rob mentioned this, and I told him to, but I'll mention it for him. The Ohioans Against Common Core website, they have downloaded how many?
42,600.
42,000 opt-out forms in the state of Ohio.
42,300, sorry.
There are thousands of people across the state of Ohio that are looking at opting out their children. And I know, as was talked about, you're going to hear some blowback. It's going to hurt the school, it's going to hurt the district, it's going to hurt the teachers. The fact is, it won't hurt anybody this year because they've already been protected. And if we get House Bill 7 passed, it won't hurt your children either. And with that, I'll say congratulations for being here and turn this back over to Mandy.